Hello and welcome to our next Ableton Live tutorial. This is Mr. Goodman, and today we are going to be doing part one of a two-part lessons about measures in music and looping measures in music. So our first lesson is called Measures in Music, and our learning objectives are: I can define the term measure, I can define the term time signature, I can identify one measure on the musical staff, and I can identify one measure in Ableton Live. Our essential question for these two lessons is: how does identifying measures help me understand looping in Ableton Live? Now, this essential question, we are going to talk a little bit more of this essential question in our second half of this video. So I just want you to keep this in mind, and then we'll actually reference it in our second lesson. So let's get started. Now, I decided to just Google the definition of measure, and this is the first one that came up. In musical notation, a bar or measure is a segment of time corresponding to a specific number of beats in which each beat is represented by a particular note value, and the boundaries of the bar are indicated by vertical bar lines. Now that's pretty confusing. So what I did is I made a simpler definition of a measure in music. And I came up with this. A measure is a segment of time. The time signature tells us the amount of beats in a measure, and in between measures, there are bar lines. Now this still might seem a little confusing, but I'm going to go to a next slide to kind of explain this a little bit more for you. We're going to start with a measure as a segment of time. Now, if we are looking at the musical staff right here, you'll see we have four measures: measure 1, measure 2, measure 3, and measure 4. The next sentence in our definition is the time signature tells us the amount of beats in a measure. Now our time signature is right here. Time signature right here. And this is called 4/4 time. And basically what this means is that we have 4 beats in each measure, and each of the beats is a quarter note. So we have 4 quarter notes in each measure. You'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in this measure, 1, 2, 3, 4 in this measure, 4 in this measure, and 4 in this measure. The last sentence is: in between measures there are bar lines, and these are these vertical lines right here. This is called a bar line, this is called a bar line, this is called a bar line, and this is a double bar line, which means it's the end of the music. Now, measures are sometimes called bars also, so we could call this bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, and bar 4, and that's why these are called bar lines. But we're going to call them measures. Now, if you look underneath it, you can see what a measure looks like in Ableton Live. Now, you'll see we have the same here: 1 measure, then 2 measures, then a 3rd measure, and then a 4th measure. And you can actually see that we have some bar lines in Live. Now in Live, our time signature is in the corner here, and you'll see it says 4/4, which means we're in 4/4 time. And if you're curious what that looks like on the screen, oh, I'm sorry, it's right up here. You'll see 4/4, and that's our time signature, which means we have 4 quarter notes in each measure. You'll see our first measure here, our second measure here, our third measure here, and our 4th measure here. So now let's do some review. Looking back at our learning objectives, our first one was: I can define the term measure. And I want you to think about this sentence stem. A measure is a segment of blank. One word, think about it for a second. And in this blank should be the word time. A measure is a segment of time. Our second learning objective: I can identify the term time signature. And for this sentence stem, we have 2 blanks. The time signature tells us the number of blanks in each blank. Our answer should be the time signature tells us the number of beats in each measure. And remember, the time signature is the numbers at the beginning of the staff, or in live, the number in our top corner. And for most of our lessons, we're just going to be using 4/4, which means there are 4 quarter notes or 4 tas in each measure. I can identify one measure on the musical staff. What I'd like you to do right now is what we did before, and I would just like you with your finger to circle one of those 4 measures with your finger. Okay, so we could have circled this one, this measure, or this measure. And lastly, I can identify one measure in Ableton Live. And down here we have our measures in Ableton Live. And I would like you to circle one of those measures with your finger right now. Okay, so we should have circled this measure, this measure, this measure, or this measure. Now, in our next lesson, we are going to be talking about a word called looping, and we're going to talk about how to loop one measure or 2 measures in Ableton Live. So be sure to check out the next video, and we will learn how to loop some measures. Thanks.